then the next thing I did was to collect all the pictures I had of the Hindu gurus. I removed them from the frames, took them to the backyard, got a match, and burned them. I had lots of questions, and what convinced me of the truth of Christianity was the empirical, objective evidence.
So that's interesting. So that's sort of then the background history, sort of the general overview of their belief system and their scriptures. So let's pull it back here. This is sort of this would be the backdrop, the belief system that you would have grown up with as a child, right?
Yes, but I did not know much about Sikhism growing up as a child because um, you're taught to memorize maybe one or two prayers that the Sikhs, say, but not the deep philosophical theology. And I think 99% of Sikhs do not know their teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib.
Mm. So it wasn't like, was your family devout then, or would they have been not really that devout?
No, I grew up in England. I had all my education there. And my father went to London before World War II. And we were not very devout.
Okay. So then I know as you grew older, like within your household, what part did Sikhism play? Like how was it implemented then into your life when you were growing up?
I think most Sikhs that I knew, they were basically just, in the West to earn a living.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them had cut their hair because one of the tenets of Sikhism, according to the first guru, is to work hard.
Okay.
Very strong work ethic. And it was basically a practical worldview. It wasn't as though they had a deep understanding of what is Sikhism. Obviously, there were the educated Sikhs probably would have, but the only way you can get knowledge is to study. And I don't think in the schools in India they really studied that deeply. It was mainly cultural or the rituals. There are some prayers that Sikhs will say,
Okay.
morning or the evening prayer, etc. But as for studying it, the whole counsel of God, so to speak, from their scriptures, I don't think any of them did that.
And what sort of rituals, if let's say a family is relatively orthodox, what sort of rituals are involved then within Sikhism?
Well, an Orthodox Sikhs, first of all, has to be initiated.
Okay.
And according to Sikh beliefs, they have to keep the 5 Ks. These are outward symbols of their faith, one of them being, unshorn hair. That's why
Okay.
they wear a turban.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got to carry a sword, they've got to carry a comb, there's special underwear, etc.
Okay.
So the reason they call the 5 Ks because in Punjabi they all start with the letter K.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
there's an initiation service which they term as a Sikh baptism, which is a total misrepresentation because there's no baptism, there's no dunking in water. It should really be called the Sikh initiation.
Okay.
And then they have to they're obligated to say their morning prayers, the evening prayers, etc.
Okay.
And obviously be quote unquote good Sikhs,
Mm-hmm.
morally.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds almost like there's not nearly as much uh practical in the sense of ritualistic practices. So like for instance, there's some religions out there, such as I don't know, Judaism, even Islam and stuff, where seems to be a lot of laws that are necessary to follow in order to maintain your status as like a good Jew, good Muslim, or something along those lines. But it sounds within Sikhism, there's a couple of those, but it sounds like it's a lot of it is just practical fleshing out of being a moral person.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
The only thing that they make a big thing out of is their scriptures, which they really treat as though it's a living person.
Okay.
They revere it as their living guru. So the
Mm-hmm.
ceremonies to do with that and the rituals, like putting it to bed at night, waking it up in the morning, etc. Some of the rituals of Sikhism.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So there's that's sort of like I guess some of the if you're more orthodox and those are some of the rituals and stuff that would be performed. In your case, though, since you weren't extremely orthodox, I'm assuming that wasn't necessarily a large part of your life then growing up, within your household specifically, with those different type of rituals and things.
No, but having the Sikh scriptures, if you no, if you want to keep them in the home, you have most Sikhs will have a separate room
Okay.
for the scriptures, and they are a big volume. They're not something you can hold in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and very few homes have the actual Guru Granth Sahib itself, because you do have to do a lot of the rituals. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most Sikhs do not, so they wouldn't have anything to do with the actual practice of those rituals.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more rituals in the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which you can look up on YouTube. What they do, each evening and morning, etc.
Okay. Okay. All right, interesting.
And
So,
if those scriptures are to be transported or carried, they have to be carried on the head,
oh,
reverend.
uh,
Yes,
why is that?
in reverence.
Just in reverence? Was I didn't know if there was like was the one did one of the gurus do that or something or
Yeah,
um
it is a living person, must be respected, and it should be always at a higher level, than human beings.
mhm. Okay, interesting. Um, so now let's I think we'll start delving more and more into your story here. Since I think we covered quite a bit of a good backdrop information for Sikhism. So let's start diving a little bit more into your story personally. As you grew up, what was one of the first religions that you started, I guess, participating in or being a part of as you grew older? Because I know you didn't necessarily stick with Sikhism your whole life.
Yeah, I was about 5 years old when I went to England, and obviously originally I espoused Sikhism, and I did know the morning prayers, which I would recite. And I did originally have long hair, was cut when I went to England.
Okay.
So I would say, that was my first exposure to any uh, worldview or religion.
Okay.
And then growing up, getting my education uh, as a teenager, well, actually, just as I'm coming up to being a teenager, I guess my worldview was more secular. And then as a teenager, I got involved with a Christian cult called the Worldwide Church of God, which is an American cult similar to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hmm.
I discovered that was not actually, the truth. And
And
so
how old were you at this time when you got kind of caught up in that?
13 to 16.
How does a 13-year-old, because I'm assuming you're still living with your parents at the time, how does a 13-year-old get involved with an organization like that?
Well, it was from a radio program, and well, I think his name was Armstrong. I forget his first name now.
Okay.
He was the leader of the cult. He was extremely charismatic. He had radio programs, he had TV programs. He had a glossy magazine called The Plain Truth.
Okay.
We used to sell transistor radios in my father's business when they first came out, and I happened to tune into one of his programs. And when you're young, you're impressionable. And he was an extremely charismatic speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I did know about Christianity from school because in those days, we did a whole lesson every week on the Old Testament and the New Testament.
What year would this have been?
Excuse me?
What year would this have been roughly?
This would have been 1965.
Okay. Okay. So you listened to these programs and did you like try to, as a 13-year-old, kind of practice them, or were you just listening and learning about it?
No, I was listening and I subscribed to their magazine, which arrived every month. And so I was getting a caricatured version of true Christianity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is why I eventually rejected it and decided that, Sikhism was, good as any other religion. But before I did that, I did check out Hinduism and a guy called Sai Baba, who has, I think, about 5 or 6 million followers. Both I rejected both Hinduism and this cult of Sai Baba.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, just decided that Sikhism is good as any religion, and we cannot really know the ultimate truth. I was born as a Sikh, I'll die as a Sikh.
Is that a general perspective that Sikhs will take, that like we can't really know too much about God and stuff, so or is
Yes,
that just was that just you?
no, I think that's pretty general. But
Okay.
then, on the other hand, they believe they have the real truth.
Okay,
Um,
yeah. It does always intrigue me when I observe, especially mystical religions, this tendency to say that there's multiple paths or there's everyone's a seeker, but at the same time, if you don't follow this objective path or these five paths or something, you still won't make it. Like it does sometimes strike me as interesting how those two philosophies blend together sometimes.
but when it comes to religions, you've got to separate what the religion teaches and the scriptures teach and the people.
Mm-hmm.
We are to love people unconditionally,
Mm-hmm.
as Jesus did, but we are to confront truth, just
Yeah.
as Paul did and
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
So,
So Sikhs are, I do want to stress they are wonderful people,
mm-hmm.
and they are very loyal. They're loyal to the British too. Um, so when confronting truth, it's important that we must love the person as a,
Mm-hmm.
to what they believe.
Mm-hmm. And definitely in our day and age on the internet, it's important for people to take the time to talk to other people of different backgrounds and listen and actually try to, understand each other and then have these healthy dialogues about the differences and trying to come to truth, come to the realization of the truth.
Absolutely. Conversion is a big issue among Sikhs now because many Sikhs are becoming Christians in the Punjab, especially the low caste.
Wait, do Sikhs also have a caste system?
They're not supposed to, but they do.
Okay. So the actual teachings of Sikhism don't teach caste, but sometimes in practicality it fleshes out that way.
Not only their scriptures don't teach caste, like I said, if you go further back, the Bhakti movement, the Bhagats, they're the real originators of the rejection of caste,
Mm.
as well as uh, Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is very sad because they don't really practice what their scriptures preach in respect to the caste system.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, so we were going back to your story a little bit. So you left the Armstrong Worldwide Church thing at around 15, 16. You kind of cast that away. You started delving into Hinduism a bit. What was the one specifically that the teacher you got caught up with a little bit?
Sai Baba.
Sai Baba. What what makes Sai Baba different? Or what did he teach exactly?
Um, he actually claims to be the 11th incarnation of Vishnu. He's God in the flesh, etc. And apparently he did miracles. He had followers. Um, and I did read most of his literature, but there was an incident that proved to me that this was totally false. I would have to tell you the whole story. Um,
I mean, I'd be interested in hearing that story. What made you think it was completely false?
well, my wife's cousin was visiting from the US, and I went to pick him up at the airport. And on the dash of my car was a picture of Sai Baba. And you can recognize him because he's always dressed in orange gown. He has a big sort of afro hairstyle.
Is he still alive today?
No, he's not.
Okay.
And he's from South India and he's dark. And he saw the picture and he said, "What is this devil's picture doing in your car?" I and I was like shocked. I said, "No, this is Sai Baba." He said, "I know. I lived in Bangalore. I've been to his ashram, and he's a fraud." Of course, I didn't believe him. Yeah, he left. Because he just came for a wedding, and then one day I came home and I found a bag with apples in it, pears, and the string that women wear around their the Indian. So it's called salwar, the pant,
Okay.
to tie it up. And being involved in all this, what I now know as the demonic realm, the first thing that came to my mind was, this is a weird combination. Uh, Somebody must have done some black magic or something. So I thought, I got to find out what this is. So I
Okay.
went to the house where we used to have the meetings, uh, singing hymns to Sai Baba. This was late at night, around 10 p.m. And this young man, who must have been barely 12 or 13, was apparently in touch with Sai Baba or his spirit, and you could ask him anything you want. So I told him I had this bag, and what did it signify? And was it a curse or something, or black magic? So he would go into his little room, come out about 20 minutes later, and he came out 20 minutes later and said, well, Baba does not want you to know what is the significance of this. But he can tell you that it is actually a black magic and a curse on you. So I said, well, go back and find out who did this. It goes in for another 20 minutes and comes out, and he says, Baba doesn't want you to know. You cannot know who it is. Anyway, I was stubborn, and I refused. I said, I'm not going to leave. So he goes back again. This happened 3 or 4 times. By then it's midnight. And eventually, I guess he realized that I'm not going to go away until I get an answer. He said, it was your sister. I was stunned. My jaw dropped. You know, how can this be? I'm the only brother, and all my sisters love me. But then when you are into something and you're brainwashed, and I do know what is brainwashing, there's nothing that can make you believe otherwise. I mean, you know, Sai Baba is the incarnation of God. How can he get anything wrong? So then I told him, go back and find out how to cancel this curse. So he goes back in the room, comes back 20 minutes later, and says, you have to throw the bag with its contents into a river, into the ocean, or a river, or a big lake. Okay, so I rush back, drive back to home as fast as I can. And my mom is still up because, you know, she was waiting for me to come back, didn't know where I'd gone. I just go straight to the kitchen, pick up the bag, and rush straight out. And she's trying to call me that we are going, come back. I said, I'll tell you when I, get back. So there was a lake about 15 minutes away from my home. So I went there. This is well past midnight, and it's very dark. The moon is in the sky, and there are some swans in the river, fast asleep. So I just throw the bag in there and wake those poor creatures up, and then I take a sigh of relief and drive back home calmly. I arrive home and my mom said, what did you do? Why did you take the bag? And I told her I'd been to, the Baba's place, and that they told me that it was a curse and I had to throw it in a river or a lake and to cancel the curse. And she said, you silly boy, that was the neighbors who left that bag. And I was speechless, but didn't believe it. And I was so upset, I didn't sleep all night. So first thing I did when I got up was to call the neighbor. And she says, I said, did you leave anything yesterday? She said, yes, I left a bag. Was everything okay? I said, yes. I said, what was in it? She said, well, it was simply pears and apples from my backyard that your mom wanted, and she wanted me to get me the cord for her pants. And I said, yeah, okay, thank you. And I put the phone down. And the next thing I did was to collect all the pictures I had of the Hindu gurus, Sai Baba, etc. I removed them from the frames, took them to the backyard, got a match, and burned them. I said, this is all false religion, and I'll just stick to Sikhism.
Okay,
So,
so you then went back to your Sikh roots then.
yes,
Okay. And how old were you? Would you have been at this point?
I was, let me see, probably in my mid-20s.
Okay. So you go back to Sikhism, then what sort of follows from there?
Oh, I'm a secular humanist. Man is the measure.
Mm.
Oh, if man can land on the moon, we can do anything. Science is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't too interested in religion, just eat, drink, and be merry.
So would you have considered yourself agnostic, or would you have still just said you're a Sikh, but you just sort of lived a hedonistic lifestyle? Like, what would you have classified yourself then at the time if someone asked you?
Now, at the time, I mean, I had no training in theology or philosophy at that time, so I didn't even know what was an agnostic. But looking back, I guess that's what I would be described as, a secular humanist.
Okay.
Um, yeah, like I said, eat, drink, and be merry. And that,
So, so what did you like? I guess during that time period, what were you doing? Like, what job were you working, or what were you kind of?
oh,
Um,
I had taken over the family business, so I was in the fashion business.
the fashion industry.
Yes, in London.
What type of clothing or fashion would that have involved?
Um, Teenage uh, fashion clothes.
Okay. All right. So you were kind of then you took over the family business. Based on the way I heard a little bit about your story, obviously, before I came on here. Based on what I understand, things were going pretty well monetarily for you. Like you weren't struggling.
No, my success business was successful. I was even driving a Rolls Royce, Audi, a couple of other cars. Bought a new home. I bought the warehouse I was trading in. Um, yeah, things were pretty good until we had a recession and things went wrong. And that was actually the time I started thinking about God again, and which led me to explore Hinduism and Sai Baba, etc.
Okay. So that would have been during your 20s, like
Yeah.
that time period. Okay. So then what got you then to start after this hedonistic lifestyle? What got you to start going into after Sai Baba, where did you go next religiously, spiritually?
I was, like I said, I was a secular humanist until um, I believe the year was 1984. I had a dream, and I do not believe it was an ordinary dream. I would believe it was um, a vision from God. I was stuck in a maze. I couldn't get out all day, and it was getting towards dusk. Everywhere I turned was a dead end. And then finally, I saw some light. So I ran towards the light, and sure enough, that was the exit. But when I got out, there was nothing there, absolutely nothing, except um, a huge billboard which had three letters on it: USA. Um, I guess a subtle hint. And I'd always wanted to go to the USA because the cult I was involved in was an American cult. I'd studied the US geography, etc., and I knew a lot about it. Always wanted to go there, um, but my father never wanted me to go there while he was alive. Um, mainly because of the gun violence here.
Mm.
And I told my wife I had this dream. And I said, I want to go to America. I want to check it out. She said, yeah, why not go? So I came here and I liked it. I saw a lawyer and I said, I want to come here. And he said, well, you can get a business visa. You have enough money to invest to buy a business. I said, yeah, I can sell my assets and do that. So,
Mm.
which is precisely what I did. I went back. This was in May when I came out. In July, I had sold my business and the real estate, etc. And in December, I sold my home. And January the 5th, I was in Los Angeles.
LA.
Yes, the city of angels.
That's right. So when you showed up at LA, what did you end up doing then?
I had to buy a business, and I ended up buying a pizza franchise. And this was in October 85. And a couple of years later, in fact, almost 2 years later, somebody left a book in my restaurant, which I put away for 2 weeks, but nobody came. So I decided it's time to throw it away. But then I had a look at the title. It was This Late Great Planet Earth
Mm.
by Hal Lindsey. I thought, wow, this must be a really good science fiction. I like reading science fiction. Let me see what it's about. To my surprise, it was not about science fiction. It was about Bible prophecy.
Mm.
And I began to read it because the cult I was in, as I told you, they had all their prophecy upside down, and they were a work system. They were not Christianity. They were a cult that was based on a work system.
So were you at the like when you were in the United States though, you weren't necessarily were you actually a part of the cult or did you just remember that associated with Christianity?
But this is like 20 years later, 18, 20 years later,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I would say it's like the hound of heaven was still after me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I started reading it, and gradually I began to realize that what I had been taught by the cult was not true biblical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of questions which were answered one after another. I used to write to the Christian Research Institute. I listened to the Bible Answer Man program. I had lots of questions, lots and lots, and gradually they were all answered. And what convinced me of the truth of Christianity was the empirical, objective evidence for the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That is when I had to surrender to God and admit that, yes, indeed, Jesus did rise from the dead, and you can prove it today.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, what he had to say was true, because he himself said that his resurrection would be the evidence that he was the Messiah and that everything he said was true.
What sort of specific evidence was compelling to you for the resurrection?
It's the cumulative evidence for the resurrection. Um, First of all, the body was missing. Nobody found the body. And yet 50 days later, the cowardly disciples were boldly preaching to the millions of Jews that were there in Jerusalem that Jesus was the Messiah and that he did rise from the dead. So if he didn't rise from the dead, And all the Jewish enemies of Jesus had to do was go to the tomb, produce the body. They could not produce the body. The best they could do was to bribe the soldiers who were guarding a dead body, which is unheard of in history. Nobody guards a dead body because it's not going to rise. So obviously Jesus has said he was going to rise, and that's why they had the guard. And the Jews had to bribe them to tell the lie that they had fallen asleep and that the disciples had stolen his body, which is obviously a lie on the face of it, because if you're asleep, how do you know what was going on, let alone that the disciples stole the body?
Mm-hmm.
So that was just one aspect. Furthermore, that stone is supposed to have weighed over 2 tons. And the disciples, first of all, they were in hiding. They wouldn't steal the body, not when there was a Roman guard guarding it. And did they manage to do it so quietly that these sleeping guards didn't wake up? So, etc. I mean, there was so much evidence for the resurrection that it is absolutely irrefutable evidence. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, Paul says that is the litmus test for the veracity of Christianity. Only Christianity has a criteria for its falsification, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to prove Christianity is false, all you have to do is to prove he did not rise from the dead, which the most brilliant minds in the world have tried to do and have ended up being believers in the Christian faith
Mm-hmm.
without any exception.
Mm-hmm. So then you are going through this process of listening to apologetics, listening to Christian teachers, sort of engulfing yourself in that. Then when would you have converted then to Christianity in your life?
I actually took 6 months off work to get to the bottom of whether Christianity was true or not. So it took me 6 months to surrender to God, to the evidence that Jesus did rise from the dead.
So you spent 6 months like day in, day out just reading and listening to evidence?
Yes, reading, and Josh McDowell's book I started off with, More Than a Carpenter, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Um,
Did you also read opposition or like the counter arguments and try to compare them?
oh, yes. I mean, I got the transcripts of even the cult I was involved in, where he was interviewed on the Ankerberg show. And I was reading the transcript, and then I would you read one side, say, yeah, that's right, that's true. And then you read the counter exam, oh, wow, that makes sense, that's true. And it was like I was struggling in my mind. Um, and the thing that convinced me about the cult itself was we're in Acts, when Ananias and Sapphira kept some money, and in Acts it says that they had lied not to man, but to the Holy Spirit and to God. In other words, the Holy Spirit was God.
Yeah.
And the cult I was in did not believe that. It believed that the Holy Spirit was a force.
Okay.
So it was things like that, and it was a struggle because there's a lot of issues and things you have to study and work through in your mind. I mean, I struggled with the concept of the Trinity, the virgin birth of Jesus, Um, but then, it was a long time before God revealed himself quite clearly as a triune God with the incarnation of Jesus.
I know earlier you mentioned within Sikhism there was this concept of the gurus being deified, but yet still trying to maintain their humanity. How would that have differed, or I don't know if that was a point of contention for you when you were exploring Christianity in regards to the incarnation of Jesus? I don't know how those compare or not.
No, most Sikhs do not believe their gurus were God.
Okay.
And only, I mean, the credulous Sikhs would believe that they were God. So that wasn't an issue for me. I didn't believe they were God.
Okay.
And I mean, the incarnation is not something we can really comprehend comprehensively, but we can apprehend the Trinity. Also, we can apprehend, we can understand it comprehensively and exhaustively, because you would have to have the mind of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually further evidence for the veracity of Christianity, because it does have concepts like that which only God could reveal and that are beyond our total comprehension.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So during the 6 month period, you're reading different arguments, you're studying Christianity, you're reading the counter arguments, and then at the end of it all, you conclude then that Christianity was what you were going to go with.
I had no choice. Like I said, it was like I'm cornered with my hands up and I have to surrender to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that's the
then,
to believe anything. The only reason to believe anything is because it is true.
mm-hmm. And then how did this play out with your family?
Um, my family, like I said, they weren't strict Sikhs. So my sisters, they didn't, think too much of it. But obviously, it was actually 10 years before my wife accepted the Lord,
Mm,
uh, which also proves that it is not us human beings that convert anybody, not even by clever arguments or reason. It is entirely the grace of God and the Holy Spirit working in a heart, in an individual heart,
mm-hmm.
transforms and changes them. Because the Bible says we are all spiritually dead, and it requires a spiritual miracle which only God can do, not
Mm-hmm.
any human being. Um,
And so, and then your wife ended up converting. Did other people within your family end up converting then, or what did that look like?
no, but there are some family members in England who are believers now.
Okay. And did you have children or something at this time who would have uh, taken on Christianity?
Well, my oldest son was about 11. My oldest child was my son, 11, and the youngest was 5. So we would go to church. So they were exposed. But
Mm-hmm.
like I said, being born in a Christian family doesn't make you a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a supernatural work of God in your heart. And my son became a believer. Then my younger daughter, but then my granddaughter became a believer, and she led her mom to the Lord. So, yeah, my entire family is, uh, Christian, but none of them were forced. It was all by
Mm-hmm.
the word, the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. So now that you became a Christian, now what do you do? Like current day, what do you do with your life?
Well, after I became a believer, I was running my, restaurant, and then I actually went into teaching because I wanted to devote maximum time to studying Christianity, and I also had a hunger and a thirst to learn about Sikhism because I didn't really know much about Sikhism, and I wanted to understand the religion of my ancestors and my culture. So I did, spend the past 35 years, 30 years, 35 years, I think now, um, studying both Christianity and Sikhism, as well as other religions,
Mm-hmm.
apologetics, theology, philosophy, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, every Christian, we have something valuable called the gospel. We want to share other people with other people because we love them
Mm-hmm.
and we want the best for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible does say people are spiritually dead and they're going to be antagonistic, and the Sikhs obviously are going to be just as antagonistic.
Mm-hmm. And so, by what I understand, you currently then run a ministry that focuses on trying to reach out to different communities like Sikhs.
Yes, I'm also very busy writing books. My first book came out, The Light of the Satguru, which presents the gospel and also parallel columns with the Sikh scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the Sikh scriptures themselves or the gurus consciously recognized that they were teaching things that were maybe in common with Christianity or that was fulfilled by Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But those verses, nevertheless, are in their scriptures, and they do point to only Jesus fulfilling all the attributes of God as described in their scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and there's a series of books I would like to write on the nature of God, nature of salvation and liberation, according to Sikhism and Christianity, comparatively, etc.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So it looks like we're approaching about an hour and a half here. I think we will do 20, 30 more minutes within the Ko-fi or the paid section of it. So if people want to go check that out, they can. We'll probably end up delving a little bit more into the details about a couple of those stories regarding either the Armstrong cult, maybe a little bit about the other cult that you were in a little bit there. And then maybe do some more comparing, contrasting between Christianity and some of these other religions. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check that out within the Ko-fi section. But for those on just YouTube, we'll be ending it here for you guys. And as always, friends, go out there and light the world. Preview for the paid members section.
Sikhs often accuse converts, "Oh, you've been brainwashed." And I know firsthand it's 100 times harder to unbrainwash yourself than to get brainwashed.
How you got out of the cult, like what made you leave?
Fear of the end of the world. That was what triggered an acute depression. I had to be hospitalized, be on tranquilizers and antidepressants.